Hello, my name is Bridget. This channel is called Dear Mom and Dad, Video Letters to My Jehovah's Witness Parents. This first and introductory episode is titled, Grandpa Died and You Didn't Mention It. Now, before we begin, there are some things that have to be understood. One of those things is that Jehovah's Witnesses are very strongly encouraged to shun the former members. Sometimes these people are called disassociated. This generally refers to people who might have written a letter and actively severed ties with the Jehovah's Witness religion. Other people are disfellowshipped, and that's basically the Jehovah's Witness term for excommunication. And other people are faded, people who didn't send a letter, who, weren't brought before a Jehovah's Witness judicial committee and disfellowshipped. They simply faded or walked away and went about their own lives. But in any case, in recent years, Jehovah's Witnesses have been encouraged to show these people in all these categories pretty much the same treatment, regardless of the circumstances. Now, as a consequence to this, many former members are in the position where they can't express themselves or communicate with Jehovah's Witness families or even family members because this is taken very seriously. And in fact, there really isn't considered to be a good enough reason for leaving. You could leave because you decide that you are no longer in agreement with doctrine. You could leave because you said, well, I was baptized, when I was, 14 years old, and now that I'm older, I just don't see things the same way. You could even say that, I've noticed some things that are taking place with within this organization. I don't really agree with it, and because of that, I've decided to separate it. And you could say, no harm, no foul. I don't bear anybody here any bad will. I'm not wanting to disrupt you particularly. I'm just wanting to remove myself from this particular spirituality and form of belief system. None of that's going to matter. You're going to get the same treatment no matter what. It's just kind of the way that it is. You can't expect to be shunned until such time as you return to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and if you don't do that, then those relationships are pretty much severed forever unless your friends or family members, they themselves, leave. So this whole idea about the channel being called, Dear Mom and Dad, it's about really exploring the consequences of this level of indoctrination and this level of devotion to, well, anything really, whether it's religion or a political or social movement, whatever else it is. When someone is so committed that it is really taking precedence over normal family relationships and normal friendships, I think it is something that is a matter of concern. This is really an opportunity to try to express some things that I can't say directly to my family or friends, mostly because they wouldn't allow the conversation to happen. And if they did have a conversation with me, it would be focused on, well, are you coming back? When are you coming back? Here's all the reasons why you should come back, or don't bother me until you do come back. And, you cannot have a reasoned, logical discussion with someone under those conditions. It's just not going to happen. So rather than reaching out to people and having conversations that lead absolutely nowhere and pretty much have a predetermined outcome, I decided this is a much better format. I can lay out what I have to say, and some other former members of the Jehovah's Witnesses may be able to very well relate to things. These may be things that they wanted to say to people, that they've tried to say to people, or that they have and they didn't get the best reception. And it's also good for people who've never been associated with this organization or people who are becoming acquainted with it, just to hear about what goes on when some of their ideas are put into practical application and the fallout from all of that. But rest assured, this isn't about me bashing my parents or other relatives or former friends who are still Jehovah's Witnesses. My intention is just to highlight the situations that arise after leaving a high control group and share my thoughts about current events that are going on within the Jehovah's Witness world. So that brings us to the reason for this video and what really has sparked off the video series that I'm planning to do. February 19th, 2018, my aunt calls up my cousin to inform her that our grandfather has died. My cousin thereafter contacts me because she's the only one in the family who has my current phone number and contact information. The next day, my boyfriend and I were discussing it, and I said, "Oh, the witnesses have been a little funny. I want to make sure I get to Grandpa's funeral. I want to make sure that we get the right information." So he says, obituaries are a matter of public record. We go online, we look for it. And when we did this, we discovered something that was really quite upsetting. My grandfather actually died February 11th, and he was buried February 16th. My cousin and I didn't know until February 19th, but he was already buried February 16th. So what's sad is that when my aunt contacted my cousin came away from the conversation with the impression that our grandfather had just passed away. She wasn't told that the services had already been done and he was already buried and any of that. Um, and we were both intending to go and to face whatever we had to face with that. So it was upsetting to discover that we weren't going to be able to attend. I did tell my cousin, and it was after that that I started letting the weight of what had occurred really set in. First, I felt really sad about my grandfather. Of course, he was my grandfather. But I was thankful that he did live to see the age of 84. I was thankful that when his time came, it came peacefully, gently, and he didn't suffer. He died in his sleep. And I was thankful that I at least knew that that had happened. That was all good, because if I had never known and found out years later, everything I'm feeling right now would feel so much worse. But in spite of all that there were some things to be glad of in the situation, it is a fact that both my cousin and myself were deliberately excluded from these proceedings. And that did have me scratching my head. It really did. Now, granted, I'm trying to be fair here. Both my cousin and I did leave the Jehovah's Witnesses. I left really in 2013, finally and completely. She was a couple years behind me, but still, this was a reality that everyone in the family had been living with, the fact that we were both gone. I think both of us did understand that shunning of some form, in some degree or another, was probably going to happen, and that's something I accepted and made my peace with from the get-go. It was just going to have to be what it was, because I couldn't live in that life anymore. However, in spite of all that, and knowing that is, through the normal course of events, that, we were going to have to tolerate the fact that we would have a very estranged relationship with our family members, it was still for many years the official position of Jehovah's Witnesses that while they did generally cut off all association with former members, but in the event of necessary family business, contact was permitted. I call a funeral pretty necessary family business. People should know they have every right to attend. I recall at my great-grandfather and great-grandmother's funerals that I suddenly found out about another great-uncle that I had. He had been disfellowshipped for many years, but he was still very much involved in that process. It was a necessary family business, and the whole religious issues were set aside in order to deal with all of that. Now, however, in recent years, the emphasis given to the importance of avoiding former Jehovah's Witnesses, even family members, it has intensified. In fact, in 2016, there was a video released at Jehovah's Witnesses convention that illustrated stricter requirements for the shunning. They even showed a scene in which a disfellowshipped woman was calling up her mother, and her mother, looked at her phone, saw who was calling, and she set the phone aside and ignored it. They're wanting to go that far, and it's been brought out by many other people who've done a rebuttal of that particular video, or who have commented upon it, that, what if the daughter had been in the hospital? What if she had been hurt or in a car accident, or any number of the disasters, and she was calling to just tell her family? And what if it had been something like that, and then the parents missed the call? I mean, what a horrible situation to after to live with, that, because of the parents' religious beliefs, they didn't find out about something that serious that was going on with their child. But I digress. In fact, if you would like to find out a little bit more about that video, I would suggest going on YouTube, going to the John Cedars channel, and look for his Worst Convention Ever series. He goes into that one at some length. Very good analysis. But still, even after I saw that come out, and I knew that, there wasn't going to be any possibility of reaching out to anybody anytime soon and having any kind of decent result from that. I knew that, but I still thought that there would be an exception made in the case of a death of a family. Now, I am unlikely to ever fully know what my parents' motivation was for not reaching out and telling me what happened. And as I admitted earlier, they don't have, my current phone number, but we are all on Facebook. My profile is very public, and I have left it public specifically for the purpose that if in the event something serious happened with any of my family members, they have the ability to contact me immediately. I have left that open deliberately, and I find it very difficult to believe that they haven't looked at my name a time or two on Facebook just to see if I was still there and still all right. I mean, I check in on their profiles every now and then. I find it very strange that they wouldn't do the same. Maybe they thought that because I left the Jehovah's Witness organization that equated to me not having an interest in my family. And that simply isn't true. And I'll go into this in more detail in other videos, so not too much here. But, deciding that you cannot live with religious precepts is not the same thing as saying, I don't want anything to do with my family ever again. People leave and have to accept that their families will not let them have anything to do with them, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to ever see them again. You might need a period of time to decompress, but that doesn't mean that you expect to never speak to them ever again, or that you wouldn't at least be open to it. Maybe they have seen my Facebook page and they're aware that my current spiritual beliefs are a world away from what they believe, and maybe they thought I would try to insert some of my spiritual practices into the funeral or into the proceedings, and they would disagree with that. Maybe that's what they thought, or maybe they thought I would go so far as to cause a disruption at the funeral. I'd behave badly, or use the occasion to make some kind of protest or pitch up some other kind of fuss. I honestly don't know what they were thinking. But if any of those things went through my parents' minds, the only thing I can say is, you have seriously misjudged my character. But on the other hand, how could they not do anything but misjudge me? The truth is, they never really knew me. They certainly don't know me now. But they will through these videos. I have a hope, and I have a sixth sense that someday they will come across these videos in some way, shape, or form, and that will be an avenue for them, for the first time to really understand what goes on in my head, why it goes on, and why I've made many of the choices that I have. But if there was one thing I could say to my Jehovah's Witness relatives right now, it would be this. Grandpa's funeral wasn't about you. It wasn't about your preferences or your fears. It was about his life. It was about comfort for the people who had been in his life who were left behind. My cousin and I were a part of his life. We had the right to attend, and just to be able to look on his face one last time. Excluding us didn't serve a purpose. And I'm telling this story not to shame my family, but because I think it's important for people to realize and to see how this particular story and instance showcases what indoctrination and blind obedience can do to people and their families. If I'm not good enough to attend a family funeral, that's really saying something. There are even some criminals serving time in prisons who, upon the death of a family member, they will be allowed to attend that funeral under guard. They get whisked back to prison, but they at least get to go and say that last goodbye. And on the off chance that my parents are watching this particular video, do you know what would have happened if I had attended Grandpa's funeral? I would have sent a floral arrangement. I would have sat quietly during the service. If anyone there had deigned to talk to me, I would have said that I was glad to be there to remember my grandfather's life, and I would have avoided the subject of religion entirely. My only purpose would have been to pay my respects. That's it. Nothing else, no ulterior motives, no larger purpose, just to say goodbye to Grandpa. Now, thankfully, I can still do that because I found information about where his gravesite is located, which I will be visiting very shortly, and I will go there and I'll say the words that need to be said. I remember my grandpa as being very shy, tender-hearted, and kind man. I remember the way he laughed when something tickled him because you could feel the joy that was in his heart at that moment. He was always a very reserved person, and he didn't have the most expressive face all the time, but when he was tickled, you knew about it. He was a great student of history. I can't remember how many different kind of documentaries on PBS that he and I would watch together, and I mean, you would have thought that we were children who'd been told that they could eat all the candy they could stand. He and I shared that particular passion. He was also a lover of nature, and most particularly of bluebirds. Even us grandchildren knew perfectly well that our names would be mud if we upset a nesting bluebird, so we learned to treat those nesting sites with great respect because of that. I remember the first time I wore ice skates, and he held my hand and helped me navigate across the tiny pond in his backyard. Struggling to keep my balance, but he helped me through that. He was also an avid gardener, and he would occasionally refuse to plant corn because he wasn't going to work for the squirrel. How he did such battle with the squirrels. Didn't like them getting in the bird feeders either, made him mad. But what I remember most about him is that I truly believe he did his best to live a moral and upstanding life, and that he was sincere in all of his beliefs. And that's the man I will always remember and honor. So for everyone who was kind enough to watch this, thank you very much. Please share this video wherever and with whomever you like. Subscribe or follow my Facebook page if you would like to see more, and feel free to comment and share your own stories below. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.